Hi, I'm Marcial, and welcome to my presentation on Clan Giovanni. So, just who are the Giovanni? As you may have inferred from their name, they originated from Venice. The clan is described as having great ambitions for wealth, power, influence, and essentially pulling shady schemes to get their way. They don't sound all that different from your typical Ventru or La Sombra, or worst of all, a corporate CEO, but they do have a few things that set them apart from everyone else. For one, their organization is very much so like that of, say, the mob. Thinking about it, the Camarilla is also somewhat organized like that. But the Giovanni hold great importance with family. Originally just Italians, but eventually it would spread to other parts of Europe, such as, I believe, Germany and the Nordics. But they're very weird in that they only ever, at least by their own rules, sire people from their family line. And it's a little taboo, shall we say, because of how the game describes how embracing and feeding feels and the whole sharing of blood. So, we'll get into that. Another thing that sets the Giovanni apart, they're necromancers. They just speak to the dead. That's their main thing. The other sects, the other clans, they hire them out a lot because necromancy is kinda useful when you're going and killing a lot of people. In older knights, the Giovanni were not the only people to have access to this discipline of necromancy, however. Other clans, such as primarily the Cappadocians, also could speak with the spirits of the dead. So, how did the Giovanni go about gaining more power over them so that more people would hire their services over the Cappadocians? They killed them and ate their leader. You know, this just kind of happens a lot in Vampire. That's how most people solve their problems. The Ventru in Carthage overthrew the Bruja by slaughtering them. The Tremere Elder, original Tremere Elder, just diablerized Salot to get his power. Yeah, it's rough being a vampire. Going more into how they sire and embrace their childer. As I said before, the Giovanni only sire from their own family lines. And by that I mean from their mortal family. They essentially groom their children into being nihilists, I guess? They treat them really poorly and also make them very dependent on the other members of the family after being ghoulified. They're told about the messed up realities of the world. They're told about how nothing good comes after death, and there's nothing good in the world, and then bam, they get turned into a vampire. Before a person is turned into a vampire by the Giovanni, they get turned into a ghoul by feeding on another's blood. And during this grooming process where they're building them up to become a suitable child, they may participate in certain, how do we say, horrid stuff. We got necrophilia, we got probably domestic abuse, we have incest. They do a lot of incest. Certain process of, say, ghoulification involve the person who's getting ghoulified. Remember, they're related. Essentially getting blood inserted through them through. We have the Black Mass, or the Blasphemous Mass, which is how the vampire process happens. Which I think is just like a giant. But then also the to-be vampire goes before their sire, to-be sire. It essentially gives an oath of their service to their new sire before the whole vampiring thing happens. And don't even get me started about because it's a necromantic ritual that gives them benefits. So as for what sects the Giovanni follow, they're very independent. They care more about their clan and their own agendas than the jihad and whatever the other vampires are doing. But they do sell their services to the Camarilla and the Sabato lot because, once again, necromancy is useful. Now, how do we screw up in Vampire 5th edition? There's no more Giovanni. There's the Hecata. They're not just Giovanni, however. The Hecata are made up of a bunch of necromantic vampire lines, plus the Samedi, but they're associated with death, so they can join in too. I think the lore reason for this is because of the Second Inquisition and how a lot of their elders were killed, so now there's only a few remaining Giovanni and Harbingers and Nagaraja and Samedi, and apparently there's, in lore, a few remaining Cappadocians now, which there's an interesting thing to go off of that, but I'll save that for their own video. But yeah, all of these various vampire clans join up one clan now, the Hecata. So we're going to be seeing more of them later. But essentially, we're going to take the hierarchy structure, the family values, quote unquote, and the clan bane of the Giovanni, and pair that with the clan disciplines and the greater fascination with death of both the Cappadocians and the Harbinger of Skulls. The Nagaraja and Samedi are also there. Getting onto the blood of the Giovanni, first is their disciplines. We begin with Dominate. And Dominate is essentially vampire puppetry. You can just command people to do things for you. That's all it is. It's just a bunch of ways to do that. It starts with a simple one-word command, then you can start giving them more commands, you can possess people, you can command vampires down the bloodline if you're strong enough. Just every vampire of your bloodline, if you're like the antediluvian. Next up, what they're mainly known for, their necromancy. There's a lot of ways you can do necromancy. It's not just one simple discipline, it's split up into a bunch of paths and rituals that you can learn. And the paths can do a bunch of different things, like there's one for reanimating corpses, there's another for working with your vampire state of both half dead and half living, and sort of exemplifying certain qualities on one side or another for a limited amount of time. There's peering into the land of the dead. There's a whole lot of them. The main one and the most basic one that most Giovanni are going to learn is simply just communing with spirits and commanding them, however. Finally, there's potence. It's just super vampire strength. That's all it is. You add them to your strength checks, and you can automatically succeed if you spend blood. The Giovanni weakness is their very painful kiss. That is when they sink their teeth into someone. Now, normally, the way it's described is that the feeding process, or the kiss, is very pleasurable for both the victim and the vampire. Not with the Giovanni. It's super painful. A kiss to a mortal from a Giovanni will do twice the damage that it normally does, meaning you can feed from them less until they die. Going into the Vampire 5th edition revisions, now your array of disciplines begins with Auspex. This is, at a lower level, increased senses. You can hear better, you can see better, you can smell better. But as it goes up, it's somewhat like divination, where you can peer into other people's spirits and get a reading of who they are as a person, or essentially recreating what happened in a certain area, up to projecting your soul into the astral realm. That's just a thing vampires can do, I guess. Then we have Fortitude. It's vampire armor. It adds to your ability to soak up damage, and it also lets you soak up damage from fire and the sun, which is normally very deadly because it's aggravated damage that you can't soak up. Finally, Oblivion. This is your necromancy ability, but it's also the Lasombra's shadow ability rolled into one. And I really don't like how they did it, because they did too with Vicissitude and Protean, where they combined them into one discipline. So now the Gangrel can just fleshcraft, and the Simisei already had Protean, but you know. So now a Giovanni can just innately do shadow magic, and a La Sombra can just innately commune with the dead. Which obviously, in lore and if you're role playing your character like how the clans are, you're not going to, but you can. And then they lock the necromancy rituals behind just taking the necromantic options in Oblivion. Also, you don't get multiple paths anymore. It's just that one line of necromancy. I'm not a fan of it. I think it was a really bad change. It removed a lot of flavor, in my opinion, and the mechanics just aren't there. Your Cruel Kiss returns as your weakness. They have a little bit more mechanics to them now. Now, any mortal that you try to feed from is just going to fight back and run from your kiss because it just hurts too much. And if you find someone who knows about it and is still willing, they still have to roll stamina and resolve to bear through the pain, otherwise, they're going to try to flee just off of their instincts. And now it affects other vampires too, because any kindred who you feed on, they have to make a frenzy resist roll, or else they're going to go into a terror frenzy. You have an alternative weakness. This one is known as decay, where it's going off of the idea of the Hekata essentially being a bunch of clans of vampires whose main thing is death. And as such, things around you just seem to die and go into disrepair. Depending on your bane severity, you're going to get flaws in your choice of retainers, haven, and or resources. That being said, however, you can buy off these flaws with your background points or freebie points. I forgot exactly how V5 does it. But they do require double the background points that they would normally take. Also, the experience points required to purchase these advantages is increased based on your bane severity. Finally, we have your compulsion, and that is morbidity. The Hekata are not simply just about death, they are about the duality of life and death. So you either gotta kill something or you gotta revive something. It could be a living thing, you could kill a person, you could revive a person. Or it could be an object, breaking something, repairing something. It could be an idea or a concept, bringing back something or getting rid of something. You have to do that. And it'll go away at the end of the scene or once you metaphorically or literally kill or resurrect something. But during that time period, anything you try and do that isn't in pursuit of this goal is going to have a 2 dice penalty. Thank you for taking my presentation on the Giovanni. This one was especially long, at least the recording for it was. The Giovanni are a clan that I've recently grown to sort of enjoy, mainly because I was playing an NPC that was related to another player character who happened to be a Giovanni. The NPC was a Giovanni. And while I always prefer thaumaturgy to necromancy more, the general idea of how the multiple paths work I always thought was very interesting. It gives you a lot of ways of expression, and also the idea of being like a wizard and searching for these new spells and paths has been really fun for me. They're really freaky though. Like, you'd think the Simisei are freaky because they're into modifying their bodies and turning themselves into monsters. But they are skin deep in terms of how freaky they are. These guys, the Giovanni, oh my god, are they freaky. But yeah, they're probably up there in terms of new characters I want to make that aren't just my already favorite clans. In other news, we hit 100 subscribers. That's wow. I I know it's just 100. That's like not a lot. That's a handful of people, but as cliche as it sounds, I never actually really thought that I'd get to this point this soon. I mean, I managed to do this in what? It's been a whole year almost, which in the grand scheme of things, especially for some other channels. That's a lot of time to get this far, but still, it's really nice. Thank you, everyone, for enjoying hearing me ramble on about nerd stuff. Anyhow, that's going to be the end of this presentation. Thank you for watching, listening, and bye-bye!